The note was small, folded neatly into the pocket of Emma's wool coat. Michael wasn't looking for it, he had simply reached in to grab her car keys before heading out. Instead, his fingers brushed against the crisp edges of paper. Curiosity got the better of him. He unfolded it, expecting perhaps an old grocery list or a work memo. But the words on the page made his breath hitch. Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again. J. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the ink a deep, deliberate blue. Michael stared at the note, his mind reeling. The words burned into his thoughts, each one an arrow to his chest. He folded it back, his hands trembling, and slipped it into his own pocket. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Even as he prepared breakfast for their 2 young children, answered emails, and exchanged pleasantries with Emma, the note whispered accusations in his mind. Could it be a misunderstanding? A stray note from a colleague or a misplaced scrap from years ago? But deep down, Michael felt the heavy pull of suspicion, like an anchor dragging him into dark waters. That evening, after the children were asleep, Michael sat alone in the living room, staring at the coat draped casually over the back of a chair. It looked so innocent, like any other day. The coat, the house, Emma herself, everything about their life was a portrait of stability. They'd been married for 10 years, built a family together, supported each other through career ups and downs. And yet, here he was, sitting in the dim glow of a reading lamp, questioning it all. He thought back to the little moments he'd dismissed over the past few months. Emma's late nights at work. The guarded way she handled her phone, always keeping it face down on the counter. The faint, unfamiliar cologne he'd smelled on her once, weeks ago, but had convinced himself was nothing. Michael clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. Was he imagining things? Was this paranoia, or was the note a crack in the perfect glass of their marriage? The next morning, Emma moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, humming softly as she prepared coffee. Michael watched her, the note like a lead weight in his pocket. She looked as she always did, poised, confident, her auburn hair catching the sunlight as she tied it into a loose bun. Her green eyes sparkled when she glanced his way, as though nothing in the world was amiss. "Are you okay, hon?" she asked, handing him a cup of coffee. Her tone was casual, affectionate. Michael hesitated, the note burning against his thigh. He wanted to confront her, to shove the paper in her face and demand answers. But a part of him was afraid. What if he was wrong? What if he wasn't? "I didn't sleep well," he said finally, forcing a smile. Emma leaned in and kissed his cheek, her touch as familiar as it was now alien. "You work too hard," she teased, brushing past him to grab her purse. "I'm heading out early, got a meeting downtown. Don't wait up tonight, okay?" Michael nodded, his jaw tight. As she left, he noticed how smoothly she walked out the door, unhurried, confident, unburdened. It was as if the note didn't exist. But it did. And now, it lived inside him, carving tiny fissures into his trust, his peace of mind. Michael knew he had to decide, would he ignore this, convince himself it was a mistake? Or would he dig deeper into the shadows of his marriage, risking everything to uncover the truth? For now, he could only sit with the question, the weight of the note pressing harder against his heart with each passing moment. The first time Michael saw Emma turn away from him while laughing at her phone, he told himself it was nothing. She had friends, after all. Private conversations. Not everything had to involve him. But the second time, when she quickly locked her screen as he walked by, it felt like a slap. The tiniest flicker of guilt crossed her face before she forced a casual smile. That flicker was all Michael needed to feel the knot in his stomach tighten. The note hadn't left his mind. Every glance Emma exchanged with someone else, every excuse she gave for staying late at work or heading out alone, became fuel for his doubts. The cracks in their marriage weren't just in his imagination anymore, they were widening, splitting the foundation of his trust. That Saturday, Michael decided to take matters into his own hands. He waited until Emma went upstairs to shower. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, face down as always. His pulse quickened as he approached it. "Don't do this," a voice in his head warned. "This is crossing a line." But another voice, louder, sharper, whispered back, "She already crossed it." His hand hovered over the device. Then, with a quick breath, he picked it up and turned on the screen. The lock required a passcode, of course. He cursed under his breath. He'd seen her enter it 100 times but never paid close attention. It was a dead end, and he set the phone down, frustrated. Moments later, Emma appeared, her hair wrapped in a towel, wearing a robe and humming softly. She paused, seeing him near her phone. "Looking for something?" she asked, her tone light but curious. Michael froze for a second too long before shaking his head. "Just grabbing my coffee." Emma smiled, but there was a glimmer of something in her eyes, awareness, perhaps, or suspicion. "You've been distracted lately," she said, pouring herself a cup. "Everything okay?" He hesitated. The answer seemed so simple on the surface, yes, fine, nothing to worry about. But underneath, the storm churned. His eyes drifted to the phone again, then back to her. "I'm just tired," he said finally. Emma nodded, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. "Well, get some rest. We've got the Johnsons' dinner tonight, remember? I'll need your help picking out a dress." Her nonchalance burned him. How could she act so normal, so calm, when everything felt like it was unraveling? That evening, at the Johnsons' house, Michael kept a close eye on Emma. She was her usual charming self, laughing easily with their friends, gliding through the room with the grace of someone who had nothing to hide. But Michael noticed things now, small things he would have ignored before. The way she glanced at her phone, just briefly, before putting it away. The way her smile lingered when a colleague of hers named Jared made a joke. The way she seemed to lean in slightly when speaking to him. It could all be innocent. But to Michael, it was another piece of a puzzle he wasn't ready to finish. "Emma's been such a star at work," Jared said during a toast. "We're lucky to have her. Seriously, she's the glue holding the team together." Michael forced a smile as the others raised their glasses. "I'm lucky too," he said, though the words tasted bitter. Jared's gaze lingered on Emma a moment longer than necessary before he turned away, laughing with another guest. Michael's fists tightened under the table. Was he imagining it? Or was there something unspoken between them, a connection he hadn't noticed before? When they got home, Emma was unusually quiet. She slipped out of her heels, her posture relaxed, as though the evening had gone off without a hitch. "You were great tonight," Michael said, testing the waters. "Jared seems to think highly of you." Emma glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "He's a good guy. We work well together." The simplicity of her response infuriated him. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but he swallowed the urge. If he pressed too hard without proof, she'd dismiss him again, make him feel like he was losing his mind. That night, as Emma slept peacefully beside him, Michael stared at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. He was no closer to the truth than he'd been that morning, but one thing was clear, he couldn't ignore the shadows growing between them. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd take a step he never thought he'd need to take. He'd follow her. Whatever Emma was hiding, he would find it. No matter what it cost. Michael felt like a trespasser in his own life as he followed Emma's car through the rain-slicked streets of downtown. He had never done anything like this before, and every moment felt like he was crossing a line he could never uncross. But the knot of suspicion in his chest had grown too tight, too suffocating to ignore. She'd said she was meeting a client for lunch. It was a plausible excuse, one she had used before without issue. But today, her tone had been too casual, her demeanor too polished. Something about the way she kissed him goodbye felt forced, like she was performing for an audience he couldn't see. He trailed her cautiously, keeping several car lengths between them. She drove with the ease of someone who had no idea they were being watched. When she pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel instead of the restaurant she'd mentioned, Michael's stomach twisted into a knot. The name of the hotel glowed softly in neon, a discreet place known for its quiet clientele. Michael parked across the street, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he watched her step out of the car. She adjusted her coat, glanced around, and walked inside with a calm confidence that made his blood boil. A few minutes later, another car pulled into the lot. Michael recognized it immediately. It was Jared's. He felt a wave of nausea as Jared stepped out, smoothing his tie, and walked briskly toward the same entrance. It was no longer a question of whether something was happening. It was a question of what Michael would do about it. For almost an hour, Michael sat in his car, staring at the hotel. His mind raced through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. Should he go inside? Burst into the lobby and demand answers? Confront Jared and Emma together, forcing them to explain themselves? But he didn't move. He felt paralyzed, the weight of his worst fears pressing down on him. The thought of seeing them together, confirming what he already suspected, was almost too much to bear. Instead, he waited. He watched as Jared emerged first, adjusting his jacket and checking his phone. His face was calm, relaxed. Michael's fists clenched as he imagined the smug satisfaction hidden beneath that facade. Emma came out minutes later, her expression serene, her steps unhurried. She didn't look around this time, didn't check for eyes that might be watching. It was as if she was entirely at ease, knowing her secret was safe. Michael followed her home, his mind numb. Every mile felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. He wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but he knew this wasn't the moment. Not yet. He needed more, something undeniable, something she couldn't twist or explain away. That evening, Michael acted as though nothing had happened. He helped Emma with dinner, asked her about her meeting, and even laughed at a story she told about one of her colleagues. She seemed entirely unaware of his inner turmoil, her laughter light and carefree. But Michael's heart was heavy. As they sat together, eating in the warm glow of their kitchen, he couldn't help but wonder how many lies had been told at this very table. How many moments of their life had been a performance, hiding the truth behind a polished veneer. Later that night, as Emma slept beside him, Michael stared at her phone on the bedside table. It was locked again, as always, but this time he was prepared. He had seen her enter the code earlier, catching the pattern of her fingers out of the corner of his eye. He picked up the phone, his hands trembling as he entered the code. The screen unlocked, revealing her messages. He scrolled quickly, his breath hitching when he saw Jared's name. There it was, a thread of texts, casual on the surface but laced with familiarity that made Michael's stomach churn. Can't stop thinking about yesterday. Same time next week? You're addictive, you know that? Don't worry, no one suspects a thing. Michael's hand shook as he read the words. He felt as though the ground beneath him had given way, plunging him into a freefall. Every doubt, every suspicion, every fear was now a reality staring back at him from the glowing screen. He locked the phone and placed it back on the table, his chest heaving with suppressed emotion. Emma stirred beside him but didn't wake, her breathing even, her face serene. Michael stared at her, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak so intense it was almost unbearable. He had his proof now, but it brought no relief. Only pain. And a single, burning question: what would he do next? The proof sat in his mind like a burning brand, searing him with every passing thought. Michael couldn't look at Emma without hearing Jared's words in his head, "Can't stop thinking about yesterday." Each time she smiled at him, every time her voice chimed with casual warmth, it felt like a dagger twisting deeper into his chest. But he didn't confront her. Not yet. Not until he had a plan. That Saturday, Emma told him she was going to the office to finish up some urgent paperwork. The same excuse she'd used the week before. Michael nodded, feigning casual disinterest, and kissed her goodbye at the door. The moment she left, he moved quickly. Earlier that week, he had installed a small GPS tracker on her car. He hated himself for it, hated the lengths he was going to, but he couldn't live with the doubt gnawing at him. Now, watching her location on his phone, he saw her car heading downtown. His heart pounded as the small blinking dot stopped in front of the same boutique hotel. Michael arrived 20 minutes later, parking across the street and waiting. He watched the entrance like a hawk, his eyes searching for any sign of her. And then he saw them, Emma and Jared, stepping out of the hotel together. They were laughing, their shoulders brushing as they walked toward the street. Jared's hand lingered at her lower back, guiding her with a possessiveness that made Michael's blood boil. Emma didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her smile radiant, her body language open and warm. They looked like lovers. Michael gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He wanted to storm across the street, grab Jared by the collar, and demand an explanation. But he stayed frozen, his heart pounding, his thoughts spinning out of control. What good would it do to cause a scene? What could he say that wouldn't make him look weak, desperate, pathetic? Instead, he pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. The image was grainy, but clear enough, Emma and Jared standing close, their expressions too intimate to be mistaken. It wasn't just proof. It was ammunition. That night, Michael couldn't bring himself to speak to Emma. She came home late, smelling faintly of perfume and wine, her smile as bright as ever. "Long day," she said, kicking off her heels and collapsing onto the couch. "How was yours?" "Fine," Michael replied, his voice tight. She didn't seem to notice his tone. Or maybe she didn't care. She went on about her workday, sharing details that Michael knew were fabrications. He nodded along, his responses short and clipped, barely masking his anger. At midnight, as Emma slept soundly, Michael sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photo on his phone. The image mocked him, a reminder of everything he had lost, everything Emma had thrown away. He thought of the years they had spent building a life together, the sacrifices he had made for her, for their family. And now, she was risking it all for him, a man who didn't belong in their world, who didn't deserve her. Michael's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from his best friend, Ryan. "You up? Let's grab a beer tomorrow. Need to talk." Michael stared at the message, debating whether to respond. Ryan had always been the voice of reason, the one who could talk him down from his worst impulses. If anyone could help him make sense of this mess, it was him. But then, another thought struck Michael. Why am I looking for advice? This is my life. My decision. He glanced at Emma, sleeping peacefully on the couch, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside him. The sight of her made his chest tighten with anger and sorrow. Michael stood, gripping his phone tightly. He was done waiting, done pretending. Tomorrow, he would confront her. And he wouldn't hold back. Morning came heavy and slow, the weight of Michael's decision pressing against him like a boulder. He barely touched his coffee as Emma flitted around the kitchen, humming a tune under her breath. She seemed radiant, glowing, even an infuriating contrast to the storm brewing in Michael's chest. "Anything special you want for dinner tonight?" she asked casually, her green eyes glancing up at him. Michael set his mug down harder than he intended, the sound reverberating through the quiet kitchen. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but steady. Emma froze for a fraction of a second, her smile faltering. "About what?" she asked, recovering quickly. She poured herself a glass of orange juice, her movements overly controlled. "About where you've been going," Michael said, his eyes boring into hers. Emma's hand paused mid-pour, the juice sloshing slightly in the glass. "I told you, work's been hectic." "Why?" she said lightly, but there was an edge to her voice now, a flicker of tension in her expression. Michael pulled out his phone, his hands steady despite the storm raging inside him. He unlocked it and slid it across the counter, the image of her and Jared outside the hotel staring back at her. "Because I've been following you," he said, his voice like a knife slicing through the air. Emma's face drained of color as she looked at the photo. For a moment, she said nothing, her lips parted slightly in shock. Then she laughed, a nervous, hollow sound. "You've got it all wrong," she said, shaking her head. "That's nothing, Jared and I were just—" "Don't," Michael interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. "Don't lie to me. I saw you. I know what's going on." Her defenses crumbled in an instant. Emma's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as she said, "I never meant for this to happen. It wasn't supposed to be." Michael's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. "Not supposed to be what? Not supposed to be discovered?" His voice rose, his emotions boiling over. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? To this family?" Emma wiped at her eyes, her tears streaking her mascara. "It wasn't about you, Michael. I was lonely. You've been so distant, so focused on work, on everything but me." Michael's jaw clenched. "So this is my fault? You're blaming me for your affair?" "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "Jared, he made me feel alive again, like I mattered. But I didn't want it to go this far. I didn't mean to hurt you." The words hit Michael like a blow to the chest. He stared at her, his anger battling with the ache of betrayal. "You didn't mean to hurt me," he repeated, his voice breaking. "Emma, you tore our life apart. How could you do this?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was lost, Michael. I didn't think." "No, you didn't think," he said, his tone icy. "You didn't think about me, about our kids, about everything we've built together. You thought about him." Emma's tears came faster now, her composure slipping. "I'll end it," she said desperately. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, Michael, don't give up on us." Michael stared at her, his mind racing. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, was a stranger to him now. He wanted to believe her, wanted to grab onto the shred of hope she was offering. But the image of her and Jared, the texts, the lies, they were burned into his memory. "I don't know if I can," he said finally, his voice heavy with emotion. "I don't know if we can ever come back from this." Emma reached for him, her fingers brushing his arm. "Please," she begged. "Just, give me a chance. I'll prove to you that I still love you. That I can make this right." Michael pulled away, stepping back as if her touch burned. He shook his head, the weight of her betrayal crushing him. "I need time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Time to think. Time to figure out if I can even look at you without seeing this." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Emma standing there, tears streaming down her face. As Michael closed the door behind him, he realized he had no idea where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay in that house, couldn't face the woman who had destroyed the life they had built together. For the first time in years, Michael felt truly alone. Michael spent the night in his car, parked at the edge of the lake where he and Emma used to go when they were first married. Back then, life had felt simple, filled with laughter, dreams, and promises they'd sworn would never break. But now, as the sun rose over the water, the glow didn't bring peace. It brought questions. He stared out at the rippling waves, her words from the night before replaying in his mind. "Please, Michael, don't give up on us." The plea had sounded genuine, but could he trust it? Could he trust her? When Michael finally returned home, the house was silent. Emma sat at the dining table, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. A cup of untouched coffee sat in front of her, the steam long gone. She looked up as he entered, her expression filled with cautious hope and deep regret. "I didn't know if you'd come back," she said softly. Michael set his keys down on the counter and stood across from her, the space between them feeling like an unbridgeable chasm. "I don't even know why I did," he admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Emma flinched at his words but nodded. "I deserve that," she whispered. He sat down, leaning forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "Do you even realize what you've done?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. Our kids. Everything we built together." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "And I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But I still love you, Michael. I made a terrible mistake, and I hate myself for it. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." Michael shook his head, his frustration mounting. You already did lose us, Emma. The second you decided he was worth risking everything for, you lost us. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't look away. Then let me fight for us, she pleaded. Let me prove to you that I can fix this. That I'll never make the same mistake again. The kids were still asleep, the house eerily quiet. The weight of the conversation pressed down on Michael, suffocating him. He stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. How do I even begin to forgive you, he asked, more to himself than to her. Every time I look at you, I'll see him. I'll see the lies, the sneaking around, the hotel. He trailed off, his voice cracking. Emma stood too, her movements tentative. You forgive me one day at a time, she said. You let me earn back your trust, piece by piece. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. Just don't shut me out, Michael. Please. He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers for something, truth, remorse, anything that might help him believe her. How do I know this isn't just another lie, he asked. You don't, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But if you give me the chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Later that day, Michael found himself sitting in the park, watching families play on the grass. Parents chased their children, laughter ringing out in the crisp autumn air. It was a scene he'd once taken for granted, but now, it felt fragile. Temporary. He pulled out his phone and stared at the picture he'd taken of Emma and Jared outside the hotel. His thumb hovered over the delete button. Keeping it felt like a chain to his anger and pain, but letting it go felt like erasing the truth. He exhaled sharply and pressed delete. The image vanished, but the hurt remained. When he returned home that evening, Emma was waiting. The kids were upstairs, their laughter echoing faintly down the hall. She stood in the kitchen, her hands wringing nervously. I want to try, Michael said, his voice steady but cautious. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move, as if afraid he might change his mind. But, he continued, this isn't forgiveness. Not yet. You broke something in me, Emma, something I don't know if I can get back. If we're going to try, you need to understand that it's going to take time. A lot of time. I understand, she said quickly, her voice trembling with relief. I'll do anything, Michael. Whatever it takes. He nodded, his jaw tight. We'll start with therapy. Together and separately. And I need you to end things with him. No contact. Ever again. It's already over, she assured him. It's been over since you found out. I swear. Michael held her gaze for a long moment, searching for sincerity. Finally, he nodded, though his heart still felt heavy with doubt. As they sat down together for dinner that night, their children chattering happily between them, Michael realized that the road ahead was far from clear. The fractures in their marriage ran deep, and he wasn't sure if they could ever be fully repaired. But for now, he was willing to take the first step. For his family. For himself. And for the faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Subscribe to never miss a new story and discover even more captivating tales.